involved. And I know this may sound chauvinistic to some, but we have a disproportionate responsibility to lead, to deal with Russia, to deal with China, to work closely in the special relationship we have with the UK.
Can I just emphasize what President Bush said? The United Nations passed the resolutions. The nation states, America, Britain, France, the Arab states that joined the coalition, did the fighting. They did not put that fighting under United Nations command. The United Nations can't give that executive decision. It was done under two generals appointed by George Bush, and therefore it was handled as it should have been, and quickly. Bosnia, the way that has been handled, has been a great mistake. It should never have been under United Nations authority, but under the authority of those nations prepared to take action when we might have resolved it much more quickly. So yes, use United Nations for what it's meant for. But nation states do the fighting.
That is probably somewhat wrong emphasis. I believe we should emphasize that we were acting together in the international geopolitics. But from the standpoint of responsibility for new international relations, for working together, I believe that that was wrong. Doing in terms of the new thinking, you have to bear that in mind. I believe that we have to build on the capital that we had during those years. I believe we have to act in a way to...
Did you have a thought, a follow-up thought? I hear you saying that under the Bosnian structure, there was a mistake. Can you elaborate just a bit to tell us why you think that structure in place now is a mistake?
Well, it was obvious. There was United Nations saying it was going to call in the airstrikes, and then there was NATO, which had in effect to call them in. In the meantime, you were telling the enemy what you were going to do when you could decide to do it. That's no way to conduct anything. Do not use the United Nations for something for which it was not founded. You have 170 nations. They don't all agree that democracy is the best way to conduct affairs. They don't all have the same view as human rights as we have. You can't put executive decisions into their hands about war and peace. What you can use them for, and they're excellent at, is for famine relief, for help to peoples who need it. And they're marvelous at that, and they've done wonderful work in Africa, and we should enhance their capability of doing that, and they're very brave and courageous people who do it.
President Bush? Who's this guy up there? No, I'm not sure we have a difference with Michail Gorbachev. You know, this is marvelous. Listening to this guy, this is one of the things I don't miss now that I'm in retirement and unemployed. It's just great. It's so nice not to have to put up with this stuff anymore. But I don't think we're far apart from Michail on this, Margaret, because I think he would say there are certain limitations to what the United Nations can do. And that's clearly what you and I are saying. But as I look at the future, and where the world is going to be, is it going to be better for our grandchildren? By, 10 years from now, 20 nations can guarantee the peace and guarantee the safety. I think it's going to have to be hard-driving diplomacy by all of us, our countries here and many others.
By my friends and former counterparts, Margaret and George, I don't think that they will be able to persuade me and those operations, but they can find...
Whatever you want, the fact is Saddam Hussein would still be in Kuwait and probably right down the Gulf and in charge of 60% of the world's oil reserves unless George Bush and Britain and other nations had taken action and thrown the tyrant out.
reason you get applause in the United States when you say you don't want to see the U.S. as the world's policeman is because I don't think anybody in the United States wants to see the U.S. as the world policeman. I mean, but there are a lot of problems that the UN can't cope with. International trade, that's not going to be...
Well, I'll try to continue my argument. United Germany. Russia will revive.
I agree that it needs change, but I also agree that it cannot, I also state that it cannot. It's outrageous, even though we got huge differences on human rights, on political system. But if the United States pulls back and does nothing but lecture and doesn't stay involved on the diplomacy...
Be back live from San Francisco with the World Forum and this very, very interesting discussion. Welcome back to our World Forum discussion from San Francisco with President Gorbachev, Prime Minister Thatcher, President Bush. China, it's been mentioned on this stage several times. China with 1.2 billion people. China, which averaged a growth of 11.7% from 1991 to this year. That's according to a senior government economist. A question with some flesh on it. China is very sensitive about Taiwan. If Taiwan declares independence and China invades, as she has threatened to do, should the world sit back and treat it as a family quarrel?
No, I'll start. I think to suppose that military action is going to take place is wrong. We're talking about diplomacy. We're necessarily confronting all the time on human rights and see if we can't work for what the goal is, and that's the peaceful solution to the question between China and Taiwan. I think it'd be irresponsible. I don't know whether Margaret or Michail would agree. If we I for one would not want to be a part of that discussion.
Me next? Look, I think you could assume that both Taiwan and China would handle it very much better than is contained in your question. But I think that you have forgotten. I think you're being provocative. Nothing unusual in that. I think, however, you're forgetting one major factor. Deng Xiaoping introduced economic freedom of enterprise. He saw that economic enterprise in Taiwan and in Hong Kong and the rest of the world over produced far more prosperity than the rigid communism he had in fact been having in China. Now, you can't introduce economic freedom and enterprise in through the doorway without other ideas of political freedom eventually coming in. Because with the prosperity that's coming with the economic enterprise, you'll build up a middle class, you'll build up an educated class. They'll want to have a say in making their laws. They must, if those laws are to apply to commerce as well. And the history of the world has been that frequently the economic enterprise came first, but it is usually followed by political freedom afterwards. And that has been the case, and I hope and believe it will be the case with China. And that may well take place long before any such thoughts as you have indicated become difficulties for us all.
At the national level. And I think, as we need to say that I'm confident, I really am confident that the Chinese...
To each of you, this question, and it'll be interesting to hear you interact. I'm switching subjects. My wife tells me I have a habit of changing subjects in mid-sentence and not telling her. So, please tell us whether, in your judgment, you think, are we making technology a god at the expense of the human spirit, religion, and ethics?
Say that again.
I'm thinking about the internet. I'm thinking about cyberspace. I'm thinking about computers. Are we making technology, all those things in satellites, are we making technology a god at the expense of the human spirit, the expense of religion, ethics, culture, the glue?
Do you want someone to start? No. The advances of science this century have been remarkable. They have brought remarkable benefits. Because I often say to young people, look, science is neutral. The wonderful new theories, the wonderful new technology that scientists give us so often can be used for good or evil. It's up to the human being which they are used for. For example, the new internet. You can get the most wonderful messages, the most marvelous music, the most marvelous art across the internet. You can also get pornography and sadism, and we have to pass laws to stop that. Science is neutral. The miracle is, and it's a miracle from God, that the human mind gradually has been able to unfold its mysteries, both in theory and in its application to technology. Yes, we have problems. We have problems with young people. I think most people would say, look, we would like a decent, respectable, well-ordered society if we could choose to live in it. That's the problem. But that comes not from science. It comes from the breakdown of the family, it comes from a permissive society, and it comes from a dependency culture. That's where we have to tackle that aspect.
And this discussion was very, very intense, and it began at the very first plenary meeting. Of nuclear weapons, Albert Einstein cautioned, he warned that mankind is moving to a very different era and that was to blame. There was a claim made by communist ideology. We cannot hope, we cannot expect that she is right. On the other hand, that a lot depends on us, on the morality, on our morality. And let me answer now your question. I believe that we can so life, a new pattern of consumption. I believe we have, and that is only possible with advances in culture, with new values, with new patterns of life. I believe, therefore, that the test, morality and ethics, the human being, what is
After 3 years, that little light on my VCR still blinks all night long, and I don't understand a lot of this cyberspace and all of that. But look, every time we've had major technological changes, there have been, and Michail have said, because, you know, we don't need to fear it of people who haven't had it so good. So I'm not one who worries about advances of this nature. And that was what I think your question was.
Well, I was just struck by something President Gorbachev said. Each of you represent a highly industrialized nation. Listening to you leaders, Mr. Gorbachev, you say that there should be a change. We should change our way. You didn't change your way.
Well, that's the age-old argument. That's the age-old argument. Some people resist any determination, are we through this science and technology going to raise the standard of living of people around the world? And I think
main points in what you said. First, countries are not rich in proportion to their natural resources. If they were, Russia would now be the richest country in the world, Angola would be very rich, and there are many other countries that have a lot of natural resources, but they have not had an enterprise economy to develop those resources. Russia has everything: oil, gas, diamonds, platinum, gold, silver, timber, marvelous soil, but has been poor. She's also, on the second point, got very bad environment. The Aral Sea. Many, the effluent coming out of many factories, the poisonous gases not taken away, so the air made pure. I remember going to one communist country in about the 60s and seeing a powder coming out of a chimney of brown gas, which of course is a nitrous gas. And I was absolutely horrified. I said, well, what are you doing letting that happen? The lungs of the people must be terrible. This is acid. You can't let that go on. Tact has never been my strong point, as you know. And I just thought it ridiculous. And I said we wouldn't have it. I've been to many since, and sometimes the parents would tell me their children could not go out. I remember in Czechoslovakia in winter because the awful atmosphere was so terrible. So it is not the free enterprise countries that believed in liberty under a rule of law with free enterprise and a market economy that are responsible. They have created the wealth. It is the countries that have had the wrong system, which have not created the wealth, have not cared about people, and that is why Mr. Gorbachev left that system and came to a system which will create the wealth. It will create the wealth in Angola, it will create the wealth in Tanganyika, but not if you deny the people the enterprise to tap it and get it. Look at the other side. Japan, no natural resources. Switzerland, no natural resources. Taiwan, no natural resources. Hong Kong, no natural resources, the same Chinese people as in China. It is the political system which enhances the enterprise of the people and gives it a framework within which to operate, which will deal with this poverty, and should, and the sooner the better.
Well, I would like to say that the answer to your question, I believe that in answering this question, despite the very dramatic situation that we are facing now, despite the great difference, stimulating education, and they still have a sustainable, stable world. Therefore, the developed countries should perhaps be led, be guided, not always by competition. Has changed, the world has ended this confrontation, this division. We have the opportunities. And yesterday, when the Deputy President of South Africa spoke, nations should address this.
My sense of time tells me that I should only have one more question, but first to you, President Bush.
Well, no, I was just going to say we're overlooking one economic to help through providing open markets, and let them help then have the wherewithal to help solve the problems of pollution in the Rio Grande. And so I'm a firm believer in access to markets, and I am very concerned in the United States there seems to be a selfish move
We have less.
I have 20 seconds. A comment. So far as tariffs and protectionism is concerned, this should be a two-way street. The Soviet Union was not given access to United States markets, and George remembers that it was very difficult to reach agreement on trade and to get it ratified in Congress, and other countries have even more difficulty getting access to your markets, so it should be a two-way street.
Mrs. Thatcher, I'm going to give you 10 of my 20 seconds.
To answer this question as well,
just for a final thought.
Was not, in fact, given access to, of course, United States markets were. You cannot have competition between a country which is all nationalized industries and heavy subsidies against one which, of course, is totally on a competitive basis. But now they're on a different basis. What these countries want is investment. They want investment from the West, and they'll be doing better. That's my 20 seconds done.
Okay, very good. And there is just enough time for me to thank each of you, to thank you, President Gorbachev, for chairing this World Forum, and to thank you, a marvelous audience, and to our viewers around the world. Thank you very much. I'm Bernard Shaw for CNN. Good day from San Francisco.